Hello, in this video we will discuss about the histamine receptor and their role in allergic reaction, allergic inflammation. So the histamine receptor and their role we will discuss in allergic inflammation. So the histamine will be released from the mast cell, and histamine is basically the histamine has diverse effect, both pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory, which are determined by both the histamine receptor subtypes and cell stimulated types. So in this way, different cell will stimulate the different reaction and different effects. So histamine is basically the inflammatory mediators, and histamine will be degranulation from the mast cell to release and bind with a specific receptor, H1 receptor, H2 receptor, and H3 receptor. H3 receptor is the presynaptic autoreceptor. So the calcium will be increased through a H1 receptor. So remember, the calcium will be increased through H1 receptor, and in this way, the calcium will be released after the H1 receptor when the histamine will be bound with the H1 receptor. While the histamine will be bound with the H2 receptor will lead to increase the cyclic AMP and increase the cyclic AMP also the histamine 3 receptor. And let's begin to understand the different purposes. So calcium increase lead to smooth muscle contraction, increase the capillary permeability, and vasodilation and sensory nerve ending pain and itching will be occur. So on the other hand, the increase of the cyclic AMP will lead to gastric acid secretion, the blood vessel and vasodilation will be increased, capillary permeability will be increased through a cyclic AMP increase through H2 receptor when bind the histamine with H2 receptor. So the cyclic AMP will be increased through H3 receptor when bind the histamine with H3 receptor will lead to decrease the histamine release. So when bind with the mast cell, while that decrease the secretion and vasodilation will be also decrease, not increase but decrease. So let's begin to understand. Here is a person which that is infected due to the pollen or smoke or dust or any other food. So the allergic disease, atopic dermatitis, allergic rhinitis, allergic asthma, and general inflammation here problems, sympathetic activity will be increased. And in this way, let's begin to understand the blood circulatory system of the person, which contain mast cell. After the allergic reaction give produced through a B memory cell produce and plasma cell produce antibody. This antibody is known as the IgG. So this IgG will be bound with the Fc receptor of the mast cell, lead to receptor activity, and bind the allergen will lead to degranulation of the mast cell and produce histamine. This histamine will target the specific tissue for changes their physiology. Let's begin to understand the receptors and the mechanism. Let's begin to understand again the mechanism of the mast cell for production of histamine as inflammatory mediators, inflammatory cytokines. And in this way here you can see this is the plasma membrane. I am drawing for just understanding for multi-cell function. So here is the mast cell contain a granules in the vesicle. Mast cell contain histamine. When the Fc receptor will bind with the Fc portion of the antibody IgG to bind with the antigen, for example pollen, from the plasma cell produce these antibodies IgG. After this recognition to release the cytokines and inflammatory mediators, the inflammatory cytokines, and in this way the histamine will produce also. This histamine will be bound with a specific H1 receptor, H2 receptor, and H3 receptor. So for example, here is the H2 receptor and this is the H1 receptor, and we are also understanding in mast cell that contain a gamma, beta, and here is inside, and this is the out extracellular domain and intracellular domain of the receptor. And here is the antagonists who we can use for prevention of this allergic reaction. So currently several H3r ligands are available but not in clinical uses. H3r receptor antagonists such as clobin which that will be bound with the H3 receptor. In this way, the pollen will be not bind and histamine will not bind, will lead to inhibit the reaction. But let's begin to understand the H3 receptor contain trimeric intracellular subunit of protein, contain G, alpha, I, and O, which that will lead to increase the cyclic AMP. That is the second messenger. So it is important for homeostatic regulation of energy level, sleep, wake cycle, cognition, and inflammation. H3 receptor knockout can also lead disease. H3 receptor can be involved in blood-brain barrier function, and H3 receptor has also been associated with rhinitis on presynaptic nerve in the peripheral sympathetic adrenergic system, and also basal submucosal gland will be triggered by this. So here is the cyclic AMP is the second messenger will lead to increase the stimulate nasal submucosal gland secretion. So on the other hand, the cyclic AMP will lead to inhibit the norepinephrine release. In this way, the norepinephrine will be not released so at presynaptic nerve ending. So in this way, the vasoconstriction will be inhibited, but the vasodilation will be occur when histamine will be bound with the H3 receptor, because histamine receptor, so the histamine will be bound. Due to the pollen allergen or some allergic antigen will be give the response by this activity. So in this way, the sympathetic nervous system will release the norepinephrine and epinephrine will be inhibited. So the vasodilation will be occur of the blood vessel, will lead to more permeability and more fluid can be leaked, and there are a lot of things, edema can be occur. While here is the mast cell, here is the trimeric subunit. For example, when pollen will be bound here, the mast cell. In this way, for example, this mast cell will lead to alpha IO subunit will be activated, lead to immune cells activation, spleen cells, intestinal epithelium, lung synovial tissue, and central nervous system. Sensory neurons and cancer cells will be progress due to this pollen allergen. And in this way here you can see this is the basically in the mast cell will be basically is the blue color is not in the mast cell but it is a different cell because shown in the figure. But here the next is the H2 receptor. In this way the H2 receptor will bind with the histamine, will lead to trimeric subunit will be released to activate the G alpha subunit. As G alpha S will be activated, lead to adenylate cyclase to activate to cyclic AMP increase, lead to vesicle containing mucus, airway mucus production will lead to mucus production by the histamine binding, so the mucus will be produced. And cyclic AMP also the B cell, T cell, and dendritic cell, and gastric peripheral cell, and smooth muscle cell, brain, as well as cardiac tissue, vascular permeability and excretion of gastric acid will be enhanced due to this activity. And in this the histamine will be bound when. So histamine will be bound with the H3r receptor, will lead to activate the G alpha Q and 11. In this way it will be activated, lead to stimulate the PIP pathway, PIP2 pathway, will lead to increase the IP3 inositol triphosphate, will be bound with the endoplasmic reticulum with the IP3 sensitive calcium gated channel will be open, and in this way the calcium efflux will be occur from the endoplasmic reticulum into the cytoplasm of the cell, will lead to contraction airways, contraction of smooth muscle, and in this way that is why the calcium increase will lead to also increase the uh, force choline, induce the cyclic AMP formation, and also this will lead to MAP kinase activation. And in this way, the MAP kinase activation will trigger the transcriptional factor, will lead to ARC pathway, and there are anti-apoptotic, anti-apoptosis, and um, uh, differentiation and regulation will be occur. And in this way, the DNA will be activate to produce the transcription factor to translate the protein, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, tumor growth factor, and beta 1, and MCP1 and RANTES, interleukin 8, MIP 1 alpha, and pro-inflammatory chemokines, pro-inflammatory cytokines also. So this is the histamine receptor and their role in allergic reaction. Thanks for watching.